Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to Deconstructing PI Planning Episode 5. Today we are continuing the conversation with Stephan Neck, Yuval Yarrett, and myself, Eric Willicke, as we look at PI planning through the lens of the SAFE principles and look at how people can use it to really accelerate their capabilities, how people sometimes miss out on those opportunities and where things go wrong, and share ideas on how people can fix. Today we are diving in where we picked up or left off last week, and we'll pick up with Principle 7, Applied Cadence and Synchronize with Cross-Domain Planning. This one's almost the softball, the underhand toss of principles. Who wants to pick this up and get started, gentlemen? How does this one obviously help
I'll
you all?
I guess starting will be easier than adding some value later on, so I'll start. If when I ask people which safe principles come to mind when you look at PI planning, when I ask that in a class, that's the first principle that comes to mind. To me, that kind of says we don't need to belabor the connection between this principle and PI planning or the PI that much. One interesting thing to think about is, could we, like we've done with the other principles, both apply it to PI planning? Is the cadence of cross-domain synchronization for the PI, for the art in the PI, but also could we use that inside PI planning? And can we look at the design of PI planning from the perspective of that cadence that we have through the fact that we break it into iterative sessions, breakout 1, breakout 2, how do we do draft plan review, final plan review, and how do we synchronize across different domains and teams and other areas of knowledge or expertise that are represented in the room in PI planning. For me, that's how this principle comes to life.
So picking up on that thread, how does that play out during PI planning? What does cadence and synchronization look like throughout the event? Either of you.
Stephan?
Oh.
I mean, Coach Sync, the artist that used to be called the Scrum of Scrums, is one example of a cadence, right? Even within the team breakouts, we have a cadence because we kind of know that work tends to expand to the container that you give it, and that if you let people just work in their own areas and tell them, come back when you're ready, it might take a while until they come back. For me, I always remember Reinertsen talking about the drunk man on the roof, or something along those lines, where if you wait for them to reach the other side, you might have to, clean them off the floor, on the ground. You want to be next to them and, nudge them on a consistent basis, on a cadence, not based on progress.
So there's one thing we could dig into a little bit more there around the implications of not making steady progress throughout the planning event. Another one, though, that seems relevant here, Stephan, I remember last week you talking about some things you'd done to get more cycles during PI planning, I think. Was that you? Am I misremembering? How does that apply
Yes,
here?
that was me. And I would like to pick up the thread from Yuval. I like not to stick slavishly to an agenda or the structure as is, because it is helpful. But if you want to create some cadence on the fly, you have to be very attentive to what's going on throughout the different parts of the agenda, mainly the breakout sessions. Also, the coach sync. If you set them up every hour, why not move them forward or even backwards if it's needed? So keeping the freedom of accepting that something might happen and you need a different cadence throughout the PI planning. That's one of the good things I can see in the PI planning. So how to apply the cadence within. But also another aspect I would like to throw in is, if this is now the cross-domain planning and synchronization point, how do we make possible, or how do we condition people to think ahead of PI planning before you enter PI planning, so that you already use the cadence of the ending PI while socializing and preparing for PI planning, also getting into a certain rhythm in IP iteration. So I would like to extend that before the PI planning, using kind of a certain freedom within the PI planning, and then the cadence that is going on a 2 weekly basis, team iterations, and so on. That's okay for me.
Yeah, so I'll pick that one up for a second. This is one I've always looked at from the I don't know, marginally pedantic but usefully pedantic point of view of, if you are going to call it cross-domain planning, which domains? Have you looked at the list of work you're doing? Do you understand which domains must be involved to be successful? And in Safe 6.0, in Safe 6.0, the implication of that gets more extreme with the focus on flow. So the presence of the right domains is what really drives flow. And I think back to one PI planning close to 10 years ago. I hate to say it this way. And I think I might have told this story before, but it was an insurance company and they have a digital print pipeline, and that's how all the many, many different forms that an insurance company delivers to your mailbox all come together and go out. And that used to be one of their biggest sources of bugs, and like triple digit defects every quarterly release because of pre-eyes. And they brought the woman that was their liaison to that team. She came to PI planning. She got to know every team. She talked to them. She hung her own name up on their boards as a risk. And by the end, they all knew who she was. And the similar number of defects would have occurred, except whenever they had a question, they called her because they all knew who she was now. And because she had been present, part of the social network at the cross-domain planning time, they ended up with 0 defects around printing. So not just 2 orders of magnitude better, but from several hundred to 0. So to me, I start to think about that. Do you know which domains need to be relevant? Have you thought through and optimized the experience for the people from those domains? Because that's where you get the real power of cross-domain planning.
I would even go a step further, because I like this idea. Having a clear picture about the domains, we should talk about how the collaboration evolves during the PI planning. But that means as well, in preparation time, who has a certain strategy to coach that, to maybe supervise or to induce certain collaboration and an adapted cadence throughout the PI planning? Because that's the interesting question for me.
I find the remarkable power in a simple question, and that is, oh, have you met and introduced somebody? And then the nature of that introduction works wonders for helping teams know how to interact with this random person that was just placed on their doorstep. And enough of that. And a lot of the dependency management problems and delays become relationship management. And one of my goals for agile dependency management is, the way I frame it is, my goal is to create relationships within which dependencies can flow. So that no longer do I have to centrally manage dependencies. I create bilateral relationships between a team, or even a person on a team in some cases, and a person or team that's providing those capabilities. And now I've linked up those domains, and that's my decentralization. I don't need to worry about it anymore. Or I just need to monitor the health of that relationship. Like, hey, have you caught up with Tony lately? Yeah, cool. What'd you guys talk about? Awesome. And now I'm done. I've just heard all the dependency management updates for an entire set of concerns, instead of having, I'm sure you've had this somewhere in your history, a spreadsheet with hundreds or thousands of dependencies you're trying to track.
You're talking, and I'm thinking about the other aspect of team topologies that we don't explicitly mentioned that much in the safe world, which is the collaboration options and modalities, which I can see what you're describing we do in PI planning. You talk relationships. I can think of it as what kind of collaborations do we need across the different domains. We made some explicit choices around how do we set up the domains through, how do we organize around value, what are our teams. Beyond our teams, who are we bringing into PI planning, who are stakeholders that we would be suppliers of some sort that would be good for us to have those relationships with, and what kind of collaboration, what cadence of collaboration does it make sense for us to have with them throughout the PI. To continue the thread of all we do in PI planning is set ourselves up for success in the PI. Not figure out everything that will happen in the PI, but set up the relationships and the knowledge, familiarity that sets us up for success.
Yeah, so at risk of sharing the mirror that I said I wouldn't share too much this episode, this diagram from chapter 8 of Team Topologies is one that's been in my head constantly since the book came out. And actually, let me pull one other over here next to it. Wow, those two boards are at remarkably different zoom levels. And then also in chapter 8, right after it, this idea of nesting topologies. And what I'm looking for in topologies language is what are the relationships that kind of go outside the purple nubs on the top of the box. If you treat the release train as a container trying to generate flow as an outer platform, how do you then address all of the input and output relationships as relationships or topology connections of one of the standard forms rather than looking at it as a dependency and a thing to project manage? And just for clarity while we're at it, since you've all brought them up, I will drop in the definition of the interaction modes as well, because I think that's really what you were addressing in your comment. But it's it's this progression at the top of the figure 8.6 there that is fascinating to me, because when you establish the relationship, you then create the environment where they can collaborate and solve their problems themselves. I think we're at risk of moving forward to decentralization here. And then once they've established that relationship, they may not need to keep coming to PI planning, because those two domains now have a relationship. And if nobody else needs to be aware, they're already sorting it out. They've figured out what their as a service looks like. If you don't take that time, if you don't bring them to establish the relationship, or you say, oh, you don't need to come to PI planning, we'll tell you what's on your backlog, or any of those other unhealthy variants, then you're never going to get those relationships filled. The other side of this, though, is there are other mechanisms to build those relationships that don't require bringing a whole nother domain's entire team to PI planning. So having teams to get together and war game out a PI a week before the PI, for example, and then suddenly they know each other's concerns, they've got a much better risk profile for each other, and then just being on call during PI planning may be sufficient. And that might be more satisfactory for a vendor, or bring reps, or bring any of the four primary as a service interaction modes are perfectly valuable then. You could have an embedded team member from the service team for the first PI. And now that person gets to know the team deeply, and then later you don't need that anymore as a result.
That brings me, I like the keywords you threw in, Eric, and it makes me think about, again, preparation time before PI planning. How do you establish the collaboration cross-domain wise? How do you bring the people to this collaboration? And how much effort do we need as a coach or someone who is in, I'd call it the driver's seat, so that the collaboration can be established and everything else flows through the PI planning, right? How much preparation is needed? Or how much do you leave open to then really use the PI planning so that it can happen?
Yep.
For me, by the way, that's organizing around value, right?
It's a big piece of it. It's very intentional. It needs to be intentional to get the right domains in the right place at the right time. Just in case anybody's watching this and is not familiar with team topologies, go buy their book. All these pictures are credit to that book.
Hopefully read it, not just buy it, but yes.
I mean, at least give them the credit from the purchase. All right, so I'm going to hide that. We are at our time for this. Any closing thoughts on cross-domain planning? Absent that, I will offer a couple, and that is just the reminder, choose your domains intentionally. They're not functions, they're not teams, they are domains of concern or other capabilities. And essentially, you are defining your value streams fluid boundaries through who you bring and how you do cross-domain planning. There's the formal boundaries through funding and whatever else you choose, but the inherent fluid boundaries are the ones based on who shows up. And if you're a leader listening to this, your role is to encourage the right people to be in the room.
Maybe to build on that, one other thought about cadence. So for me, to summarize the conversation we've had about cadence, you should be also intentional about the cadence in PI planning, both for the PI, of course, but during PI planning as well. That cadence can be customized. You can change it. You can figure out, more frequent coach syncs, 3 breakouts instead of 2 breakouts, whatever. Be intentional about it. But at that point, I would be very careful to ignore the cadence and say, okay, they're in good flow. Let's ignore the cadence. Or they're struggling with something. Let's give them more time and, we'll wait until they're finished. That's a slippery slope. As we've discussed, drunk people, etc.
I think for the show notes, you should probably find the correct version of that metaphor and write it up, because I'm not recognizing it through your description, and I've talked to Don many times. At first, I thought you were talking about the guy looking for his keys under the street lamp, but I don't think that's actually what you were talking about.
No, that's not that.
Yeah, so we won't try to scrape it out now.
I'll try to find it.
Safe is not necessarily about drunk guys. Let's just put that out there. So moving forward to Principle 8, unlock the intrinsic motivation of knowledge workers. I guess, Stephan, this one's yours. How does this apply in PI planning?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I just had a discussion today with people in a workshop, and I always ask leaders and managers, who do you hire? The best people you can get, right? And then if you don't treat them like that, they probably deteriorate into a cogwheel, and we don't want to see that. And I highly appreciate the autonomy of the people bringing in their mastery in PI planning. But that needs high autonomy, asks for a good and high alignment. And sometimes I'm thinking, why do we only have an RTE moderating or a coach moderating the 2 days? If we look along the life cycle of our solutions or what we are talking about in a PI planning, shouldn't or couldn't some other people like business owners and leaders take the lead as well to assure we have the right discussions, we have the right people in there showing their autonomy, being guided towards the goal we want to achieve.
Yep, so that's a big one. Autonomy is fascinating for me in the scaled environment, because I've seen people want to take it to extremes, unhealthy extremes of, well, any team can do anything they want. And it's like, well, within the bounds of achieving the purpose, apply your mastery with autonomy towards a purpose, as opposed to believing you have autonomy where you have no mastery. And I see this in all kinds of forms. And the soapbox I will not get on, but I will point at briefly, is coaches who believe they have the skills to tell other functions what to do, thinking that finance is easy or HR is easy or some such. But when I think about developers who resist any form of outside influence or control, that concerns me. Almost as much as when I see developers who demand to be told exactly what to be done. That also is unhealthy. So like for me, PI planning is about finding the right balance and almost negotiating the relationship between everybody's autonomy. And then, well, recognizing that theoretically people with more masteries voices should count a little louder. Because some people do know a more right path than others. And that has its own slippery slope, of course. Gets into Bridgestone and the believability or curve and all the other things they go on.
I want to maybe step away from the autonomy, mastery, purpose to motivation, intrinsic motivation at large. I guess my comment there is that PI planning done right is an amazingly motivating event for everybody involved. Mm-hmm. Whether it's the developers, the stakeholders, everybody just gets motivated, both individually as well as it builds you as a team and team of teams, and it's great. And I'm also hearing from people that feel like PI planning is, how should I put it, a soul-sucking event, which is the classic project management reincarnated, whatever you want to call it, which just doesn't jive with how I see PI planning. So for me, if we think about it, a lot of the criticism that people have about SAFe, PI planning is kind of an object of that criticism. And if PI planning was motivating and unleashing people's autonomy, I think it would be hard. It's hard to criticize when that's what's going on in PI planning. So I think we need to figure out, where does this go wrong? Why is it so hard to see autonomy, mastery, and purpose in how people do PI planning out there in the wild?
I'm gonna answer and segue briefly, because I was just skimming through the latest updates, which were months ago, but the latest updates to the article on this principle, and I had forgotten that they added verbs, which is really powerful. So in the article now, it's nurturing autonomy, cultivating mastery, and providing purpose. And I think making these action language changes the article, or changes the concept of them in a very useful way, because now you've given the purpose givers a purpose. Anybody that's supporting the teams, are you providing purpose? Are you creating an environment to cultivate mastery? Are you nurturing people's autonomy? And I especially love the term nurturing, because giving people autonomy, suddenly empowering them in a world where they've not had any habit or practice being empowered or having autonomy, isn't healthy. Because justifiably so, people don't believe it, they don't know what to do with it, and most likely they're going to take one step outside the lines that you're able to personally enforce and get smacked if they don't exhibit the old behaviors. So that nurturing concept for this, I think, is where a lot of it comes in. Provide purpose, hopefully an exciting one that's meaningful and aligned to the company vision and so on. But then within that, nurture people's autonomy through your behaviors. And there's an infinite list of leadership tools to do so, but you have to actually do it, and you have to intentionally do it.
To pick that up, both keywords I heard: motivation and nurturing. When I'm teaching, coaching people towards the first PI planning, probably the focus of these people is all about the structure. Am I doing this stuff right? And I then, during the coaching, I tell them, guys, look, the guidance comes through your feature candidates, your initial stories, but that's not the goal. You don't plan that. And for me, the key question or the motivation I try to bring in is, you guys, you are turning speculative value into real value by planning it, right? So everything in the backlogs are assumptions. It's speculative. And if we plan, it still is speculative, but I asked people to come up with options, not only one plan. So already talking about, like you said, Eric, bring the right people together to start collaborating, thinking in options, talking about different variations. And that helped quite a lot. Kind of people pulling away from, we have to follow a structure, we have to follow an agenda. Yes, it's helpful, but it's something else we do here. And that creates this motivation that includes mastery, autonomy, and the purposes given by what we present as feature candidates or initial stories.
I'm going to go back though to also +1 Yuval's statement, because I danced around it by looking at the verbs, but to your point, I'm thinking of a specific leader. We'll call him Brian because that was his name, and he's given me permission to share some of these. But I remember the first time I got to work with him, this was the one I think both of you are familiar with. I know Yuval, you are, where I kind of had to launch that release train, or that group of 5 release trains, with a week's warning over Christmas. And Brian was in there, and he was getting ready to go up to the, let's call it value stream planning. We didn't actually have all the people of the 500-person program there, but we got about 150 of the leads and people together on short notice. And he's like, "What do I tell these people?" I'm like, "Well, in the program meetings, I've watched all these people just be so depressed as we just drone through all this. But Brian, you got me excited telling me why you're doing this program in the first place and why it's going to help the world. Just remind them of that. Open with that." And he didn't. He's the head program manager, and he just got up and started talking about the meaning and the impact it's going to have on the world, and how it's going to help a significant percentage of the American population in an interesting way. And it's like, I got excited again, and I'd already heard it like a week before. And I watched people start to lean in and engage. And like the energy level just completely shifted because he provided purpose so clearly. And that's where I saw that motivation come from, and really amazing things happened. And then fast forward 3 months, and he's like, we actually had everybody together for a 5 release train planning. And he's like, "Well, we gotta get," I won't name the VP's name in this case because I don't have that permission, but how do we get VP ready to speak? And I'm like, "Remember what you did before? Let's hear his version." And same thing happened. You got like 500 people like, "Oh, I see my executives actually caring about this in a real human sort of way," and they got motivated and got excited, and really amazing things happened. And then I got the chance to watch Brian do the third time as an executive of a different group like 5 years later. He kind of used that as his trademark then going forward, and he just inspired team after team of, when I say team, he had like 1,000 people reporting to him in one of those cases. So that purpose piece and the motivation that comes from it sometimes is the first dose people have on that in a very long time.
And to me, that's the most important thing about the context setting.
Mm-hmm.
Motivate, inspire, and get out of the way. Let people have their autonomy to figure stuff out, and be ready to serve. Be ready to connect the dots and answer questions, but don't drone on for hours upon hours.
Oh.
Motivate.
What was the second one you said? Motivate,
Inspire, and get out of the way.
And I would add, and paint a picture of what the destination looks like. Don't forget to anchor people, but not in a negative way, in a pull it forward, fifth discipline, rubber band tension sort of way.
Listening to you guys, that's lead by example, right? You set the example, you inspire, you bring in the passion, and you have clever people in there. You hire them. They are in your domain or in your engagement area. Therefore, that's the amazing part of leadership.
So one might almost say that what you're doing is laying the groundwork to decentralize decision making. Not so awkward segue. And that's really what you're setting up for. I'll take the intro on this one because it's my turn. So principle 9, decentralized decision making, PI planning both in the event through how you behave and show up and exemplify then, but really setting up the groundwork and the context and the awareness of the goals and the purpose and the relationships that allows you to safely step back and let decisions be made for the next 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 weeks. And to me, that's the primary purpose of readiness that PI planning provides. You're creating flow through your work in PI planning by establishing an environment where everybody has the clarity and mutual trust, you might back reference to Marquet there, that allows them to move forward confidently and make those decisions on the fly. And things that used to require 2 levels of escalation and an up and over big everybody meeting is now a direct conversation between a developer and the person that runs the digital pipeline, because now they know each other and there's no escalation process in the middle. So that decentralization isn't letting go of all the big decisions and like letting the future of the company be in the hands of the roll of the dice of a developer. And some leaders, I think, perceive it that way. It's creating the environment where everything is in place socially, trust, clarity, and so on, that decentralized decisions just get made in the right way. And I think in the RSA animate video from Drive of the moment where it's like making a decision like the CEO is watching or better than they would have made, that whole attitude. You get the right decision quickly with the right people because they know the people. And I think too often or most of the time, the escalation process is actually a discovery process. It's the process of finding those right people to make a decision. And we've short-circuited that.
Is it greatness or drive with if the CEO is there? I think it's greatness.
You're probably right.
Whatever.
Greatness.
Yeah, you're right.
Whatever.
It was in Marquet, wasn't it? Yep. It was RSA animate. That's all I remember.
Yes. To build a bit on that and connect it to what you said about leading by example, Stephan. PI planning can be a great opportunity for leaders to do something else that sets us up for decentralized decision making of the right decisions, which is they show during the event that they're not making all of the decisions, that they're actually letting their teams figure things out, that they're connecting teams and letting them collaborate rather than micromanaging everything. On the opposite side, if they centralize too many of the decisions, they will lead by example. The wrong example. They will lead by the example, yes, that, yeah, we're doing safe here, but we're still making decisions the old way. There's, what we talk, and there's the way that we walk. So that's where it can go wrong. If we make for me, if you make decisions during PI planning in a manner that is too centralized, you're setting up the example where people will continue to seek the central decision making during the PI itself. Not to say that no decisions should be centralized. There are some things that should be centralized. We have that, categorization. PI planning out of the box comes with a clear distinction between some decisions that are centralized and some decisions that are decentralized. And we might need to do some more thinking about other decisions that are made and how to think about them.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting. A few things come together when it comes to principle number 9. And it reminds me of my lightning talk in Immersion Week. It's about the briefing and the debriefing dialogue. Marquette says you give them intent and they give you back their intent. It's not only you give them intent and the framework and off you go, or you're just accessible, you listen to them and you might influence how they debrief their intent so it fits into systems thinking, right? We have an alignment, we have certain bandwidth. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. And this briefing dialogue is probably something going on way before PI planning, setting the stage, as you said, Eric, bringing together all the right domains to listen carefully to each other, to start debriefing as well, and then going into PI planning and coming up with probably the best feasible plan, and baked in already having some options if something goes wrong. And I really like that. In German, we call it Auftragstaktik. This mission command that where it's baked in, you give the people the freedom to do the stuff in the best feasible way, because you can't influence every situation, but you can set the stage. That's the most powerful thing. I think you have as a leader. You give them intent, they give you back intent, and immediately that starts rolling.
I adore that. I mean, that is the entire purpose of me writing the PI objectives article years ago, was to encapsulate the power of PI objectives for that.
And I'm hearing a recommendation to go read The Art of Action in what you're talking about, Stephan, right?
Yeah, for sure, because that's something, if you don't do it, you might learn it the hard way, right? If it's a one-way communication, you will get the fruits of that. If you don't allow the collaboration, the communication, even if you don't allow people to spill out what's true or what's the truth, and it might even correct your intent, and then it becomes a better intent. That's really powerful, right? I experience that quite often as an officer. I don't have to talk to a non-commissioned officer, to a corporal who in civil life is a carpenter having his own company with 20 people. This guy knows how to organize a group of people. I don't have to micromanage, but give them the intent, give them the goal, and give them the expected behavior. Then you give them certainty that they are doing it the right way, and that they are still being within boundaries.
There's a phrase that came to mind here, and it's not one I'm sure I've ever heard, so I might be coining a new one right here. And that's the idea of harvesting incoherence. And by what I mean by that is, as a leader, convey that intent and then step back, and your role for the rest of the time is the risk management role of listening for and gathering anything that doesn't make sense and having a conversation about it, harvesting anywhere you see incoherence in the system, and using that then to reduce it, to create better clarity, not by telling, or, and Yuval's slight criticism of your words, not even letting teams make decisions, but giving them additional data and encouraging them to make different decisions. Like I see that as an active nurturing of people making decisions, not just a passive allowance. And I've seen you do it, so that's not a criticism of your behavior. That's just, I don't like the word letting in English because it's very passive.
I like this thought because it's part of empathy, right? If you collect incoherence and kind of bring back people within what is coherent action, what is coherent behavior. And by the way, it's like having kids, right? If you have kids, it's sometimes frightening how they copy you. No matter what you tell them, they copy your behavior. They copy you in every aspect of life. And that's leadership. One has to be aware of that.
The example I use in classes when we talk about using PI objectives to harvest incoherence is, to think about the first time your kids are going to walk to school by themselves. What's the appropriate risk management approach for that? Are you going to just let them go? Probably not. Is it enough to tell them this is the way to go? Probably not, right? Is it better if they tell you what's their intent for how to go to school? That's probably better. It's probably even better when, you walk together and let them make all of the decisions on where to go and when is it safe to cross the street, and you're shadowing. So for me, that's the intent of what we're trying to do with the PI objectives approach. So,
yep. And then the other part of that incoherence reminds me of a story. My ex-father-in-law watching my daughter, and he would let her roam freely in the mall, and he would be 30 feet away, just out of her sight when she was a toddler. And he observed, and he was very present, but he wasn't steering or controlling. He was allowing the exploration, and we both learned significant elements about her personality and desires through that observation.
There's a Scrum Master stance called actively do nothing.
Mm-hmm. Is this the old Chris Matt's feet up on the desk mode, where you're present and entirely there, but you are appearing to do nothing? I like that.
But again, based on the competence and the maturity the teams have, right? As you described, observing the toddler is a different situation if you have teenagers. So it's about the degree of maturity, the degree of collaboration, how they can handle it themselves. That's one of the pillars. And the other one is alignment. Can you set the direction so they don't go into the wrong direction and misusing?
Yep. Definitely maturity is a question, relevant concern there. So moving to a close, does either of you specifically want to introduce organize around value in the context of PI planning? All right, then I'll take it. The relevance for me on this one is that you are reorganizing yourselves during PI planning, not logistically necessarily with people moving from team to team, although I've certainly seen that. You're not redefining the train's boundaries during PI planning, although I've had an entire new release train emerge during a solution planning. But what you're doing is you're harvesting incoherence around the alignment of teams and work, and allowing the social network to reform around the work in real time. So during PI planning, you are getting people ready to shape themselves around the work and how they actually behave, even if they're not reassigning team boundaries or anything like that. And you're testing your design of the release train for the work you're doing to ask, who are we missing? What permissions, rights, funding, humans, skills, access, etc. do we not have that stands between us and achieving the goals, so that you can do something about them immediately? And to have the permission within the train for individuals to suggest actual material changes to your organization structure in the small but relevant, and the access to the greater decision makers who may not come to PI planning, but the business owner and the product manager and the engineering director that is leading the group, all they know this person can get a quick text-based yes if necessary. That sets you up to be very fluid and create an environment of flow in the moment that then carries forward through the entire PI. So that's the way I look at it, during the PI. Now, the idea is, in theory, you've set yourself up for success and your train is already organized around the value and the large around the solution and so on. But it's just this mindset of never take that for granted. Because if you're pursuing aggressive strategies, the required shape will be evolving very quickly as fast as your strategy and your market understanding evolve.
Yeah, to build on that, what you think is an organized around value art might not be an art that's ideally organized around value. Even the first PI that it goes, and for sure, in each following PI, something might have changed that would surface as there are too many dependencies, we're not really organized ideally, and we need to do something about it, whether it's tactically within the next PI and whether it's strategically by looking at our architecture, whether technical or organizational. For me, that's where this principle comes in. I would say that if you're really thinking about organizing around value, PI planning becomes a smooth sail, relatively. If you're not thinking about it, it can be a hot mess.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you just said there. If you are already very well organized around value, you have very few dependencies, people are already clear about the purpose because you're organized around it. You're already probably in flow. And yeah, PI planning is not just a smooth sail, and this is actually the risk hiding inside of there. People begin to see it as no longer necessary. Oh, that was so easy. We didn't actually learn anything there. And I'm like, yeah, but you reasserted the value proposition, you reinformed people on purpose, you restored social boundaries and connections, you got the teams to really knuckle down and work together on something and feel that little rush of winning that cascades through the PI. And you got all these great things out of it that you don't see because it wasn't hard. So it's an interesting one. It's like if you're so well aligned you don't think you need PI planning, that means it's working like a good Scrum Master. But does that mean you don't need a Scrum Master or you don't need PI planning? Yeah, I don't know.
You might need a different PI planning.
Perhaps.
Right?
Then perhaps you can take on bigger, you can do different prep or less prep or more audacious goals or whatever.
For me, it's interesting. This principle, if you think about the goal of PI planning, having a set of committed PI objectives, achieving those goals during and at the end of the PI. The question is, how much of reorganization do you need? And you mentioned it, Eric, even in PI planning, I've seen that some team members or even whole teams said, we're not happy in that train because we don't have any dependencies. We should belong somewhere else. And we told them, okay, then get up and go where you belong to, right? That could happen. The other aspect I would bring in is what is the flexibility of an organization to really quickly bring innovation to the market? And that's dependent on, again, what are your clusters of services, products, solutions you have. And you might have some trains that are, or development value streams that are pretty stable as long as you have those stable solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Some might be in a very volatile area, and PI planning might indicate through an R planning board, indicate through the collaboration and how the domains interact, that it probably will be different next PI. And for me, the PI planning also is an outlook not only into the execution of the PI, it's an outlook how we evolve over the time and what kind of indicators out of PI planning should we consider going into PI execution, being aware that probably next PI planning could be totally different when it comes to reorganizing around value.
Slightly tangential to our conversation, but you got me thinking during what you said there. If a release train's OKRs change in a meaningful way, does that not, how often does, if the OKRs change in significant manners, should that trigger an automatic inspection of your organize around value and a recognition that if your strategy is shifting, your train design should probably shift with it? I'm not talking like re-leveling the goals of an OKR, but like shifting them out, changing an O in a meaningful way.
I would agree to that. Again, thinking about, I just reviewed the Formula One pit stop video recently, right? And we use it when we do training. But that's a deterministic process. That's not what teams face in a PI planning or during PI execution. You don't have the same car coming into your pit stop. It's different cars coming in. That's the variability you have.
Mm-hmm.
What if you're only set up and organized around value for a certain type of car? What if a rally car comes in? Or what if all of a sudden a totally different vehicle comes in, and then you're probably lost? So thinking ahead, kind of embracing that variability, that is probably helpful. And that again triggers how you reorganize around value, even during a PI planning or by anticipating what could happen during the PI execution, how that will influence how you organize.
Yeah, and
And
actually,
that's probably something I would like to hear and see more in PI plannings as well, not only coming out with a plan and a set of PI objectives.
I had a team that literally took the tape off between swim lanes for 2 of the 4 iterations. And they said for these 3 iterations, our 3 teams are going to work as one team because we're tackling this really big thing. And I'm like, I celebrated that so much because the teams went up and took the tape off. We decentralized, and they were like, yeah, we're going to organize around value because we have to solve this new platform problem. And that became the team topology's progressive rings in action. 2 iterations later, they went back to where they were, but it was the core part of the problem was solved. It's beautiful.
Hooray! That's it.
So with this, I'd love to close our review of the principles with a reflection over the last 3 sessions. What are some of your bigger insights you've had individually looking at this thing we've been doing for years, close to a decade in my case, and I think Yuval's case, and maybe your case, Stephan. But we've been doing this forever. What new insights did you have looking at it through this lens?
For me, the exercise reinforced how the success and failure or agility or lack of agility of PI planning really comes down to whether PI planning is bringing to life is the safe principles, is aligned with the safe principles or not. I think we've looked at a lot of examples where if you don't really follow the principles, what hot mess it can create, and it had created for all of us in situations in the past. And for sure, whenever I look at stories that people tell me about PI planning and how it's not agile, it tracks very easily to, are you sure that you're following this principle? So for me, the bottom line is I go back to Mark's remark even before we started this series of, if something's not working well for you in PI planning, maybe take a look at the principles. And if you think the principles don't apply for your PI planning, that's even a more interesting conversation.
What about you, Stephan?
Hard to add something to what just Yuval said. We probably have a similar thinking. I'm grateful that Mark kind of steered us towards the principles again, to watch it through that lens. Otherwise, you tend to jump to conclusions why something could be wrong, why something could be misused. And probably the key word today that sums up very well for me is, how do we move from incoherence to a coherent state or a coherent behavior? No matter what role we have, what type of leadership, are we aligned to the goals to be achieved, to the jobs to be done? And that probably sums up for me the last few episodes about going into the decomposition of PI planning.
Great. For myself, one micro one is the phrase harvesting incoherence, if I spelled it correctly, has 0 Google results in quotes, so I might have found one of the magic ones. But I think I spelled it wrong. I'll have to check. But more generally on the overall arc, Yuval, you took up to a reflection that the principles are often the root of challenges and ineffectiveness. And I I was going somewhere similar, but I was going through the lens of purpose and the why of PI planning. And if people lose sight of the goal of PI planning to be setting up that group of people to sustain flow for the next PI using the principles, then they've lost the thread. And it's that purpose element of why do we do this event in the first place? Is it working? Well, is it working for what? Like, what goal are we working on? I did a coach on the couch earlier this week around daily stand-up as a simple example of, is it working for what? If your goal is to collect status, it's going to look different than if your goal is to align on the day. And yet again, if your goal is to learn and do micro retrospectives because you're fairly advanced. Same thing with PI planning. Is it serving your purpose? Well, you better be clear on your purpose. And what are you trying to get out of it? And if your goal is truly to enhance flow, then the principles will serve you beautifully. If your goal is to use it as an elaborate project management tool for a large group of people that's probably more costly than a project management tool needs to be, you could also do that and it would work just fine for that. But you can't do both at the same time. You need to get clear. And the more I reflect on that, why are you doing it piece and what are you trying to get out of it as the key to all of this. And I might have just broken open another discussion looking at Yuval's face, so I'm happy to do that.
We do want to respect your cadence, Eric, though. You have a hard stop. Right?
I sent a text of lateness already, so if we want to do a 5-minute extra bonus round, I am happy to do so.
Okay, cool. So one quick thought there to build on that is I looking at the thread over these sessions, every time or a lot of times we talked about the fact that PI planning, the purpose of PI planning is a successful PI. And I don't think that's emphasized enough when people talk about it, when we teach it. There's so much emphasis on the PI planning as an event. There's not enough emphasis on what does a successful PI look like. I'm almost thinking about, I first want to teach people, why are we using PIs? And I do that sometimes. Why do we need anything beyond iterations or sprints?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what do we need there in order to have a successful PI? Okay, so that's why we actually need to get together and plan it. And what are options? There are some options. Each scaling approach has a different way to tackle this. We discuss trade-offs. Here's a way to understand PI planning through both its purpose as well as the principles. And this is the design that, comes out of the box. Now, if you understand its purpose and the principles, you're equipped to actually tailor it to your needs.
Is this back to the do Scrum by the book for 3 iterations before you start adding in your own? I think that was a Sutherland thing initially. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, by the way. I'm just asking. I think we're in the same metaphoric space here. But I don't want to miss the point that I let in on this. PI planning might be co-opted to serve a different purpose than we think it is. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong if you're doing it differently to serve a different purpose, but that's not the purpose of creating flow and agility for an art. And fitness for purpose is a thing. I mean, we've studied that for a decade. Anyway, that gives us a nice closing thought to ruminate on individually. With this, I would like to thank anybody that's listening, and I look forward to seeing your thoughts in the comments over time. Just double checking. Yep, nobody has commented and been ignored like we did last time. And with that, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and roll credits. Thank you, everybody. And I look forward to sharing our going forward plans with this series.